Andrew Collins had spent years mastering control. Every decision in his life was calculated, every move planned with precision. But in the span of a single evening, everything he thought he knew was ripped away. It started as a simple act of kindness, buying two little girls' teddy bears in a toy store. He hadn't expected anything in return, hadn't given it a second thought. But then their mother turned around, and in one heartbeat, his entire world came crashing down. Because the girls weren't just strangers. They were his daughters. And he had never even known they existed. Andrew Collins had spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings, negotiating deals and reviewing contracts, barely stopping long enough to take a breath. His life was a constant stream of numbers, strategies, and corporate decisions, and that was exactly how he liked it. He thrived in control, in precision, in knowing exactly what the next step would be. But by the time evening rolled around, something inside him told him he needed a break. Not the kind of break that involved expensive restaurants or business events, but something simpler. That was how he found himself walking into a small toy store, the kind he hadn't stepped into since his own childhood. The moment he entered, he was met with the soft chime of the doorbell and the scent of new plastic and plush fabric. Shelves were lined with colorful toys, from stuffed animals to action figures, board games to dolls. He didn't even know where to start. He wasn't the kind of man who bought toys, but earlier that day, his business partner had casually mentioned his daughter's birthday, and for some reason, Andrew had decided to pick out something himself instead of just sending an assistant. Maybe it was an attempt to do something a little more personal, or maybe he just needed to clear his mind, but either way, here he was, walking aimlessly down an aisle, feeling completely out of his element. As he scanned the shelves, his attention was pulled by the soft voices of two little girls standing a few feet away. They were identical, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, dressed in matching white dresses, their small fingers clutching plush teddy bears as they inspected them closely. They looked to be around 5 years old, their voices filled with excitement as they compared the toys in their hands. "This one is cuter," one of them said, hugging a white teddy bear against her chest. "No, this one is better," the other insisted, holding up a brown one. Andrew wasn't sure why he stopped to watch them, but something about their enthusiasm made him pause. They were debating so seriously, their tiny faces scrunched up in concentration, as if they were making the most important decision in the world. Then, after a moment, one of them flipped over the price tag and her expression changed. She turned to her sister and whispered something, and just like that, the excitement dimmed in both of their eyes. "We can't," the first girl mumbled, lowering her gaze. "Mom said no toys today," the second one added, shifting her grip on the bear as if she were reluctant to let go. Andrew felt something unexpected tighten in his chest. He had spent his entire life around wealth, around people who didn't think twice about spending thousands on things they didn't even need. Seeing these two little girls hesitate over something as simple as a stuffed animal felt strangely out of place in his world. Before he even realized what he was doing, he stepped forward. "What if you take both?" he asked, his voice calm but warm. The girls turned to him in unison, their big blue eyes wide with surprise. "Really?" one of them asked hesitantly. Andrew nodded, reaching for both teddy bears from the shelf. "Really? If you like them, you should have them." The second girl tilted her head, studying him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Why?" He let out a small chuckle at her caution. "Because sometimes people should get nice things, just because." The first girl's face lit up with pure delight, while the second one still seemed unsure. But when she glanced at her sister's excitement, she finally gave in, her small hands gripping the bear tighter. "Thank you, mister," the first one chirped, bouncing slightly on her feet. "You're really nice," the second added, her smile growing. Andrew found himself smiling too, something rare and unexpected. "I try." As he walked them to the register, the girls stayed close, whispering to each other in hushed voices. He could tell they weren't used to this, to random acts of kindness from strangers, and for some reason, that made him feel even better about doing it. When the cashier rang up the bears, Andrew handed them to the girls himself, watching as they hugged them tightly, their joy so pure and unfiltered that it almost caught him off guard. "Make sure you take good care of them," he said, not sure why he suddenly felt so invested in this small moment. "We will," they promised in unison, their matching voices making him chuckle. Then, just as quickly as they had entered his evening, they turned and ran toward the exit, their excitement carrying them forward. Andrew watched them go, shaking his head slightly at how such a small act had turned into something oddly meaningful. He turned back to the shelf, ready to finally pick out a gift and leave, but just as he reached for a toy, something made him glance toward the door again. The girls had run straight into the arms of a woman standing just outside, their little hands tugging at her sleeves as they excitedly showed off their new toys. She bent down, brushing a strand of dark brown hair behind her ear as she listened to them, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Then, as if sensing his gaze, she looked up. Andrew's entire body went still. His heart slammed against his ribcage, his breath catching in his throat. Because standing there, holding on to the hands of the two little girls, was a face he hadn't seen in 5 years. Kate. The name barely left his lips, but he knew she had heard it. Her expression froze, her grip on the girls tightening, her blue eyes locked onto his. She looked exactly the same long brown hair, same striking blue eyes, same way her lips parted slightly when she was caught off guard. But this wasn't just an unexpected reunion. This was something bigger. Because now, as he looked at the two little girls holding on to her, their blonde hair shining under the store lights, their blue eyes identical to his own, he felt his entire world tilt on its axis. The girls weren't just random children. They were his. And he had never even known they existed. Kate felt her entire body freeze the moment her eyes met Andrew's. It was a moment she had spent years dreading, the one she had convinced herself would never come. She had told herself that their worlds were too different now, that she had done the right thing by keeping her distance, but as she stood there holding the hands of their daughters, she realized just how fragile that illusion had been. The girls were still tugging at her sleeves, their little voices filled with excitement as they told her about the kind man in the store who had bought them the teddy bears. Kate barely registered their words, her mind too busy processing the fact that the very man she had kept them from all these years was standing just a few feet away, staring at her as if the ground had just been ripped out from under him. Andrew took a step forward, his blue eyes locked onto hers, but there was something different in them now, something that hadn't been there the last time they had seen each other. His gaze flickered to the girls, and Kate saw the exact moment the realization hit him. She knew it before he even spoke. "They're mine," he said, his voice quiet but firm, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Kate felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding so loudly that she was sure he could hear it. She could see the calculation in his expression, the way his mind was racing to fit the puzzle pieces together, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides as he fought to stay composed. "Kate." His voice was different now, rougher, edged with something raw. "Tell me the truth." The girls were still standing beside her, unaware of the storm brewing between the adults. She couldn't do this here, not in front of them, not like this. She forced herself to take a steadying breath before crouching down to their level, tucking a loose strand of blonde hair behind one of their ears. "Why don't you two go pick out a book?" she suggested, keeping her voice light even though her hands were shaking. "Mommy needs to talk to someone for a minute." The girls exchanged a look, clearly sensing the tension, but they nodded obediently before skipping toward the bookstore section a few aisles away. The second they were out of earshot, Andrew stepped closer. "How long have you been planning to keep this from me?" His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Kate swallowed hard. "Andrew. How old are they?" he cut in, his eyes never leaving hers. She hesitated, knowing there was no way out of this now. 5, she admitted quietly. His breath caught for a moment, and he exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair as if trying to ground himself. 5, he repeated, almost to himself. So they were born right after, he trailed off, but she knew exactly what he was thinking. Right after she had left. Andrew shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. So that's why you disappeared. Kate felt a sharp pang in her chest. I didn't disappear, she said, her voice softer now. I made a choice. His expression darkened. You made a choice for me. She flinched at the truth in his words. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing. He let out a disbelieving breath, his frustration finally breaking through the controlled mask he always wore. Kate, you kept my children from me. You didn't even give me the chance to decide if I wanted to be in their lives. You just assumed. I assumed because I knew you, she interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. I knew how much you cared about your career, how much you valued your freedom. You told me yourself that you weren't ready for a family, that you didn't want to settle down, that you had bigger things to focus on. His jaw tightened. And you didn't think that maybe I had the right to change my mind? She took a slow breath, trying to hold herself together. I didn't want them to feel like an obligation, Andrew. I didn't want them to grow up knowing that their father only showed up because he felt guilty or pressured. His eyes flashed with something unreadable. Is that what you think of me? Kate hesitated, then shook her head. No. But back then, I was scared. I was alone. And I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me if I told you. Andrew exhaled sharply, his frustration shifting into something else, something closer to hurt. He ran a hand down his face, looking away for a moment before locking eyes with her again. So what now? His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. Do you expect me to just walk away? Kate's chest tightened. No. Good, he said, his jaw set with determination. Because I won't. For the first time since she had seen him again, she truly believed him. Kate had imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the past 5 years. In some versions, Andrew was furious, shouting accusations at her. In others, he was indifferent, confirming all of her worst fears that he would have never wanted to be a part of their daughters' lives. But this quiet intensity, this raw emotion in his eyes, was something she hadn't prepared for. She could feel the weight of his stare as he processed everything, the muscles in his jaw tightening and releasing like he was struggling to keep himself from exploding. She knew Andrew well enough to understand that when he went silent, when his mind was working through the information faster than he could form words, it was only a matter of time before he found a way to take back control. And right now, she could see him trying to figure out exactly where he stood in all of this. He finally exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before lowering it, his blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. I need to see them again. Kate stiffened. Andrew. I'm not asking, he cut in, his voice firm but not unkind. They're my daughters, and I'm not going to pretend they don't exist just because I didn't know about them before today. Kate swallowed hard. It's not that simple. His eyes darkened. It is to me. She looked away, biting her lip. They don't know who you are. They don't know they have a father. Andrew's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something vulnerable passing through his gaze before he masked it with determination. Then it's time they find out. Kate knew this moment would come, but she had no idea how to prepare for it. She had spent years protecting them, keeping them safe from the possibility of disappointment, of a father who might not have wanted them if he had known. But now, standing here, facing the reality she had kept buried for so long, she could see that she had underestimated him. He wasn't walking away. He wasn't lashing out or trying to push the blame on her. He was standing his ground, ready to fight for a place in their lives, and she wasn't sure if she was relieved or terrified. She forced herself to take a breath. They're still inside, she said hesitantly, glancing toward the bookshelves where the twins were flipping through colorful pages, completely unaware of the storm unraveling around them. But this can't happen all at once. I need to introduce you to them the right way. Andrew nodded, his expression serious. How? Kate hesitated. Give me some time. Let me talk to them first, let me explain things in a way that won't scare them or confuse them. They're only 5, Andrew. They don't understand things the way we do. His jaw tightened, and she could tell he hated the idea of waiting, but after a moment, he nodded. Fine. But I want to be part of this, Kate. I don't want to wait weeks or months for you to decide when the right time is. I need to know them. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe this wouldn't be as disastrous as she had feared. Maybe he really meant it. Maybe he was ready in a way he hadn't been back then. She exhaled slowly. Okay. His brows furrowed slightly, like he hadn't expected her to agree so easily, but she straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze with determination. I'll talk to them tonight. And if they're okay with it, we can set something up for you to see them soon. Andrew studied her carefully before giving a slow nod. Soon, he repeated, making it clear that he wasn't going to let her push him away. Kate's stomach twisted as she glanced at her daughters, their innocent giggles filling the air as they flipped through their books. They had no idea how much their world was about to change. And neither did she. Kate spent the entire drive home trying to figure out how she was going to explain this to them. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror at the 2 little girls in the back seat, their matching blonde heads bent over their new teddy bears, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside her. How did you tell 2 5-year-olds that the man who bought them toys wasn't just a kind stranger but their father? How did you make them understand something so big, so life-changing, without scaring them or making them feel like their world was suddenly unfamiliar? By the time she pulled into the driveway, her hands were gripping the steering wheel too tightly. She forced herself to take a deep breath before turning around in her seat. The girls were still lost in their own little world, giggling as they made their stuffed animals talk to each other. Girls, Kate said gently, waiting until they both looked up. Mommy needs to talk to you about something important, okay? Both of them immediately stilled, their bright blue eyes watching her with curiosity. Is it about the teddy bears? Emily asked, clutching hers to her chest. Kate let out a soft breath. No, sweetheart, it's about the man who gave them to you. Both girls perked up instantly. He was nice. Sophie chimed in, kicking her little feet excitedly. He said sometimes people should get nice things just because. Kate forced a smile, her heart aching at how easily they had accepted Andrew's kindness. I know, baby. But, there's something I need to tell you about him. Emily tilted her head slightly, her fingers running over the soft fur of her bear. What? Kate hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That man, he's someone very special. He's not just a nice person. He's actually someone you were supposed to know a long time ago. Sophie frowned in confusion. Like Mommy's friend? Kate swallowed, her throat tight. No, sweetheart. He's your daddy. Silence filled the car. Emily and Sophie stared at her, their identical faces frozen as they processed what she had just said. Kate knew she had to let them work through it in their own way, so she stayed quiet, giving them space to react. Finally, Emily's little brow furrowed. Our daddy, she echoed, her voice unsure. Kate nodded. Yes, baby. Your daddy. Sophie shifted, clutching her teddy bear tighter. But, we don't have a daddy. Kate felt something twist deep inside her, a sharp pang of guilt and regret. I know, sweetheart. And that's because I made a decision a long time ago not to tell him about you. But I saw him today, and he knows now. And he wants to meet you. The girls exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them that only twins seemed to understand. Kate held her breath, waiting. Finally, Emily turned back to her. "Does he want to be our daddy?" Kate exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yes, baby. He does." Sophie was still frowning slightly. "Will he be nice like today?" Kate's throat felt tight again, but she nodded. "Yes. He wants to get to know you both. But only if you want to meet him." Emily bit her lip, looking down at her teddy bear as if it held the answer. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Can we ask him questions?" Kate's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Of course you can, sweetheart." Sophie was quiet for a moment longer before she nodded slowly. "Okay." Kate's heart clenched. "Okay." Emily nodded too, a little more confidently this time. "Okay." Kate felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. She hadn't known how this conversation would go, but now, as she looked at her daughters, so small, yet so open to the idea of something new, she felt the tiniest bit of hope settle in her chest. They didn't know Andrew yet. They had no idea how much their lives were about to change. But for now, they were willing to try. And that was more than she could have asked for. Andrew spent the entire night staring at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He had walked into that toy store thinking it was just another ordinary day, but now his entire life had been flipped upside down. He had 2 daughters, ***, 2 daughters ***, and he hadn't known they existed until today. The reality of it settled like a weight on his chest, making it impossible to sleep. He had built his entire life around certainty, control, and predictability, but now none of those things existed anymore. He had spent years believing that he wasn't the kind of man who needed a family. He had convinced himself that his career, his success, and the empire he had built were all that mattered. But now, as he lay in the darkness of his bedroom, all he could think about were those 2 little girls. Their matching blonde hair, their bright blue eyes, ***, his eyes ***, and the way they had smiled at him with such innocent trust before running back to their mother. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to process it, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to walk away. The next afternoon, he found himself standing outside a small cafe, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Kate had texted him that morning, telling him that she had talked to the girls and that they wanted to meet him, really meet him ***, not just as the nice man from the toy store, but as their father. He had read her message at least a dozen times, trying to wrap his head around the idea that 2 5-year-olds had already made a decision about him, even before he had figured out what kind of father he was going to be. When the door to the cafe opened, Kate stepped out first, her long brown hair pulled back, her blue eyes scanning his face for something, hesitation, regret, maybe even fear. But he didn't feel any of those things. He just felt like his entire world was about to change, and for once, he wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. Then he saw them. Emily and Sophie stepped out from behind their mother, holding onto each other's hands like they weren't sure if they were supposed to let go. They were dressed in matching yellow dresses, their little faces filled with curiosity as they looked up at him. Andrew's heart clenched so hard he almost forgot how to breathe. Kate cleared her throat softly, glancing down at them. "Girls," she said gently. "This is Andrew." She hesitated for a moment before continuing, her voice quieter. "Your dad." The words sent a strange sort of shiver down his spine. He had been called a lot of things in his life, CEO, billionaire, leader, boss, but never dad. The girls stared at him for a long moment before Emily, the slightly bolder of the two, took a small step forward. "You're really our daddy?" Andrew nodded slowly, his throat dry. "Yeah," he said, his voice softer than he had expected. "I am." Sophie studied him carefully, tilting her head to the side. "Why didn't you find us before?" The question hit him harder than he had expected. He glanced at Kate, who was already bracing herself, clearly ready to step in, but he shook his head slightly. He had to answer this himself. "I didn't know about you," he admitted honestly. "Your mom didn't tell me, and I didn't know to look." He hesitated before adding, "But I would have. If I had known, I would have looked for you." The girls exchanged a look, silently processing his words in a way only twins seem to understand. Emily crossed her arms. "Are you gonna leave now?" Andrew's chest tightened. "No. I don't want to leave." Sophie chewed on her lip. "Do you have another family?" His breath caught slightly at the question, and for the first time, he realized that was probably one of their biggest fears, that he had someone else, that he had a life where they didn't fit. He crouched down so that he was at their eye level, making sure they could see the sincerity in his face. "I don't have anyone else," he said softly. "Just you two." Emily's expression shifted slightly, as if she wasn't expecting that answer. Sophie's fingers curled against her dress as she studied him again. "Do you want to be our daddy?" she finally asked. Andrew didn't even hesitate. "More than anything." For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then, to his complete surprise, Emily took a step closer and held out her small hand. Andrew stared at it for a second before slowly reaching out, his much larger hand wrapping around hers. Her grip was small but firm, and the warmth of it sent a strange wave of emotion rushing through him. Sophie hesitated for a moment longer before stepping forward too, taking his other hand. "Okay," she whispered. Andrew swallowed the lump in his throat, his entire world narrowing down to the two tiny hands holding onto his own. He wasn't sure what the future was going to look like. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to navigate any of this. But as he looked at his daughters, his daughters, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going anywhere. Andrew didn't know what he had expected from that first meeting, but as he walked away from the cafe, his mind was still trying to process everything that had just happened. The weight of his daughter's small hands in his own had lingered even after they had let go, and for the first time in his life, he had felt something that had nothing to do with business, power, or success. He had felt the terrifying, all-consuming reality that he was responsible for two little girls who had never even known he existed until today. Kate had agreed to let him see them again, but she had been clear, it had to be gradual. They needed time to get used to the idea of him, and as much as Andrew hated the thought of waiting, he understood. He had spent 5 years absent from their lives, even if it hadn't been his fault, and now he had to earn a place in them. That realization settled deep in his chest as he sat in his office later that evening, staring out over the city skyline. He had spent years building an empire, making a name for himself, but none of it had ever made him feel the way he had felt when Emily and Sophie had looked up at him and called him their daddy for the first time. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at the screen, surprised to see Kate's name. He hesitated for only a second before answering. "Hey," he said, leaning back in his chair. Kate's voice was softer than usual, almost hesitant. "The girls have been talking about you non-stop since we left the cafe. Emily keeps asking if you have a big office like the ones in cartoons, and Sophie wants to know if you ever fought a dragon." Andrew let out a breath of a laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "I hate to disappoint them, but I don't think running a company is nearly as exciting as fighting dragons." Kate was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "They want to see you again. Soon." His heart skipped a beat. Yeah, she admitted. "I was going to wait a little longer, but I think if I do, they'll just keep asking until I give in." Andrew smiled at the thought, a warmth spreading through his chest. "I'm okay with that. What do you have in mind?" Kate hesitated before answering. "Something small. Something easy. Maybe the park. Somewhere they feel comfortable." Andrew nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "The park sounds perfect." They agreed on a time, and after they hung up, Andrew found himself staring at his phone for a long moment. This was happening. He was going to see them again, not as strangers, not as the man who had unknowingly bought them teddy bears in a toy store, but as their father. It was terrifying, overwhelming, and yet, for the first time in years, something in his life felt like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. When the day arrived, Andrew was standing at the entrance of the park before they even got there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat as he scanned the area. He had never been one for nervousness, but now, as he waited for Kate and the girls to arrive, he felt a kind of anxiety he had never experienced before. He wasn't used to being uncertain, to feeling like the outcome of something was completely out of his control. Then he saw them. Emily and Sophie were running ahead of Kate, their blonde hair bouncing as they raced toward the swings. Kate followed at a slower pace, giving him a brief nod before motioning toward the girls. "They're excited," she said. "And a little nervous." Andrew let out a breath. "Me too." Kate's lips curved slightly. "You'll be fine." He wasn't sure if that was true, but he appreciated the attempt at reassurance. The girls were already climbing onto the swings when they finally noticed him standing nearby. Emily waved first, her little face lighting up. "You came." Andrew smiled. "Of course I did." Sophie tilted her head. "Did you bring a dragon?" He chuckled, walking closer. "Not this time. But maybe next time." Emily kicked her feet, trying to get the swing moving. "Can you push us?" For a moment, Andrew just stood there, struck by how natural the request was. They weren't treating him like a stranger, weren't acting like they were unsure about him being here. They were just two little girls who wanted their dad to push them on the swings. "Yeah," he said, stepping behind them. "I can do that." He started slow, his hands carefully pressing against their backs as they swung higher. Their laughter filled the air, and for the first time in his life, Andrew realized that success didn't have to come from boardrooms or bank accounts. Sometimes, it was as simple as being here. Andrew had never thought something as simple as an afternoon at the park could mean so much. He had spent years negotiating million-dollar deals, attending high-profile events, and making decisions that affected thousands of people, but none of it had ever felt as significant as this moment, standing behind his daughters, pushing them on the swings, listening to their laughter as they soared higher into the air. It was the kind of moment he had never allowed himself to imagine, yet now that he was here, he couldn't believe he had almost missed it. Emily was the more adventurous of the two, leaning back slightly as she swung higher, her blonde curls bouncing in the wind. Sophie, on the other hand, was more cautious, giggling nervously whenever her feet left the ground for a second too long. He quickly learned their limits, how much of a push was just right for Sophie, how Emily liked to go higher, how they both squealed with laughter when he surprised them by giving them an extra little boost. After a while, they slowed down, dragging their feet against the dirt to stop the swings. Sophie hopped off first, running toward the slide, while Emily turned to face him, her blue eyes filled with curiosity. "Do you come to the park a lot?" she asked, tilting her head. Andrew let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Not really. I don't think I've been to a park since I was a kid." Emily frowned as if that was the strangest thing she had ever heard. "But where do you play?" He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer that. He had spent so much of his life working, pushing himself harder, climbing higher, that the idea of just playing, just enjoying life for the sake of it, felt completely foreign to him. "I guess I never really thought about it," he admitted. Emily seemed to consider this before taking his hand and giving it a small tug. "Come on," she said. "Let's go play." Andrew glanced at Kate, who was watching them from a nearby bench with a knowing smile, and then back at Emily, who was already pulling him toward the jungle gym. He had never been one to say no to a challenge, and if his daughter thought he needed to learn how to play, he wasn't going to argue. For the next hour, Andrew did things he never thought he'd do. He climbed through tunnels too small for him, slid down slides that were clearly not designed for adults, and even found himself on a seesaw with Sophie, who giggled every time she went up in the air. It was ridiculous, it was childish, and yet he couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so much. At one point, he was helping Sophie build a sandcastle near the edge of the playground when Emily plopped down beside him, resting her chin on her hands. "You're funny," she said, watching him carefully. Andrew raised an eyebrow. "Funny how?" She shrugged. "I thought daddies were supposed to be serious all the time. But you're not." Something about that statement made his heart tighten. He had spent his whole life being serious, being the man people expected him to be. But with them, with his daughters, he didn't have to be that person. He could just be Dad. "I can be serious sometimes," he said with a smirk. "But only when I have to." Emily grinned. "Good. Because serious is boring." Sophie nodded in agreement, patting the top of their sandcastle. "We like you not boring." Andrew felt something shift deep inside him, something he couldn't quite put into words. They liked him. Not because he was successful or powerful, not because he had bought them toys or taken them to the park. They liked him just because he was there. Kate called them over a few minutes later, letting them know it was time to go. Andrew felt a pang of disappointment, realizing he wasn't ready for the day to end. He had spent so much of his life chasing the next big thing, always looking ahead, always focused on what came next. But today, for the first time, he just wanted to stay in the moment. As they walked toward the parking lot, Sophie reached up and took his hand without a second thought. He glanced down at her, surprised, but she just smiled up at him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily, not wanting to be left out, grabbed his other hand, swinging their arms back and forth as they walked. Andrew caught Kate watching them, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he worried she would pull them away, remind them to take things slow, but instead, she just gave him a small nod, an unspoken agreement that, at least for now, this was okay. When they reached Kate's car, Sophie turned to him, her little face serious. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Andrew crouched down so he was at eye level with both of them. "If you want me to." Emily nodded without hesitation. "Yes." Sophie grinned. "Then you have to." Andrew smiled, feeling something settle inside him, something that had been restless ever since he had found out about them. "Okay. I'll be here." Kate watched the exchange carefully, and when the girls climbed into the car, she hesitated for a moment before speaking. "They like you." Andrew met her gaze. "I like them too." She nodded slowly, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. "Then don't disappoint them." Her words weren't a threat, but they carried weight. He knew that after 5 years of raising them on her own, after 5 years of making every decision for them, trusting him wasn't going to be easy for her. And he didn't blame her. "I won't," he said simply. Kate studied him for a moment longer before finally nodding. "See you tomorrow, then." As he watched them drive away, Andrew realized something. For the first time in his life, he had something worth showing up for. And he wasn't going to let it go. Andrew had always believed that his success was measured by what he built, the deals he closed, the companies he expanded, the numbers in his bank account. But as the days passed, as he spent more time with Emily and Sophie, he started to realize that none of that compared to what he was building now. The next afternoon, as promised, he showed up at the park again, but this time, something was different. When the girls saw him, they didn't hesitate. They didn't study him with cautious curiosity or treat him like someone they were still trying to figure out. Instead, they ran straight toward him, their little feet kicking up dust as they threw themselves at his legs, wrapping their small arms around him without a second thought. For a moment, Andrew just stood there, completely still, trying to process the fact that his daughters were hugging him like he belonged to them. He wasn't sure what to do with the unexpected warmth flooding his chest, so he did the only thing that made sense, he crouched down and hugged them back. Kate watched from a few steps away, her arms crossed over her chest, but there was no tension in her face this time. Just something softer, something almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust what she was seeing. Sophie was the first to pull back, her blue eyes shining as she grinned up at him. "We thought maybe you forgot." Andrew smirked, ruffling her blonde curls. "I told you I'd be here." Emily looked at him seriously. "People say things sometimes, but then they don't come." Something about the way she said it made his stomach twist, and he glanced up at Kate, who was already looking away, pretending to focus on something else. He realized then that this wasn't just about proving himself to his daughters. It was about proving himself to their mother, too. He exhaled and looked back at Emily. "Well, I'm not just people. I'm your dad." Emily studied him for a moment before finally nodding, as if deciding that was an acceptable answer. Then she grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the jungle gym. "Come on, we have a game to play." The afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and small victories. Sophie made him sit on the grass and watched as she tried, and failed, to do a cartwheel, giggling each time she landed sideways. Emily insisted he help her climb the monkey bars, and when she finally made it across, she beamed at him with a kind of pride that made something in his chest ache. Kate stayed nearby, watching, but she didn't interfere. She let him be their dad. As the sun began to set, they all made their way back to the parking lot, the girls walking in front of them, still holding their teddy bears from the toy store as they chatted about the best part of the day. Kate glanced at him. "You're good with them." Andrew looked at her, surprised. It was the first time she had acknowledged that. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time," he admitted. "I'm just trying to figure it out as I go." She smiled slightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Welcome to parenting." He let out a soft chuckle. "You make it look easy." She shook her head. "It's not. But it's worth it." He nodded, watching his daughters walk ahead of them, their small hands swinging in the air as they talked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." As they reached the car, Emily turned around. "Can we see you again tomorrow?" Andrew didn't even hesitate. "Of course." Sophie looked at him with wide eyes. "And the day after?" He crouched down so he was at their level. "I'll be there for as many days as you want me to be." Emily grinned. "Forever?" Andrew felt his throat tighten. He looked up at Kate, whose face was unreadable, before turning back to his daughters. "Forever." Kate didn't say anything as she helped them into the car, but before she closed the door, she looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. He had a lot to make up for. He had lost years he could never get back. But he had today, and he had tomorrow. And for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. The ending of this story carries a deep emotional weight because it is not just about a man discovering he has children, it is about redemption, second chances, and the power of love to reshape even the most rigid of lives. Andrew starts as a man who thrives on control, who believes success is measured by power and achievements. But through Emily and Sophie, he learns that true success isn't about money or status, it's about showing up, about being there for the people who need you the most. Kate's journey is just as significant. She made a choice years ago out of fear, out of a desire to protect her daughters from disappointment. She believed she was doing what was best, but in the process, she denied them the chance to know their father. Watching her lower her walls, seeing her begin to trust Andrew, is just as much a transformation as his own. But the heart of this story lies with Emily and Sophie. They are innocent, full of unconditional love, and open to letting someone new into their world. They are the ones who teach Andrew what it means to be a father, not through grand gestures, but through the small, everyday moments that build a real bond. Their acceptance of him isn't about his wealth or success, but simply because he is theirs. The final moments, where Andrew promises to be there forever, are a powerful reflection of how far he has come. In the beginning, he was a man who had no idea what he was missing. By the end, he knows exactly what he has found, and he refuses to let it go. It's a story about finding what truly matters, about taking responsibility, and about learning that love, real, unconditional love, is the most valuable thing a person can have. The past can't be changed, but the future is built on choices. And Andrew, for the first time in his life, is choosing something greater than himself.